woman leaving the bars in Printer's Alley one night saw something standing near the dumpsters. Something that shouldn't exist in downtown Nashville. Printer's Alley in Nashville never really sleeps. Even on a slow night, the neon lights buzz, and the music spills out of the bars like a river of noise. That's where Amanda was walking that night, heels clicking on the wet pavement, trying to call a ride after the last bar closed. Her phone had no signal. She laughed to herself and leaned against the brick wall of an old building. The alley was mostly empty now, just trash cans, dim lights, and the faint smell of whiskey and cigarettes hanging in the air. That's when she heard something heavy move in the darkness behind the dumpsters. At first she thought it was a drunk guy. "Hello," she called. No answer. Then something stepped forward. It was tall, far too tall for a man, and covered in thick black hair that glistened under the alley lights. Its shoulders nearly touched the metal fire escape above it. Amanda froze. The creature's eyes reflected the neon signs, glowing a dull red in the dark. For a moment, neither of them moved. The music from the bars echoed faintly at the end of the alley, but the thing in front of her seemed completely still, like it had stepped out of another world. Then, it took a step closer. The pavement shook under its weight. Amanda turned and ran toward the streetlights at the end of the alley. When she finally reached Broadway, the noise of the city swallowed her again. Cars, music, laughter. She turned around. The alley behind her looked empty, but sometimes late at night when the bars close, people swear they see a huge shadow standing near the dumpsters in Printer's Alley, watching the crowds and waiting for the noise to fade. Stories like this are just the beginning. I post longer stories and book chapters on my Substack and Ream if you'd like to read more. The links are in the description. My granddaddy once forced a Sasquatch to drink moonshine in a Tennessee holler, and it might be the only reason he survived. Folks around Readyville used to say my granddaddy, Melton Hayes, could make moonshine so strong it'd peel the paint off a barn door. But Grandpa Melton never bragged much about his whiskey. What he liked to talk about, usually after 2 or 3 jars, was the night something in the holler tried to kill him. Now, Grandpa was what you might call a stubborn old mountain man. He kept his still way back in a narrow Tennessee holler where the trees grew thick and the fog settled low in the mornings. It was a good place for a moonshine operation because nobody came wandering through unless they were either lost or up to something themselves. Grandpa liked it that way. One October evening, he loaded a mule with sugar sacks and copper tubing and headed down into the holler to check on the still. The leaves were turning orange and brown, and the air had that cold smell that comes right before winter. He said everything felt normal at first. The creek was running steady. The fire under the still was burning low and quiet. The mash barrel was bubbling just the way it ought to. Grandpa poured himself a little taste of the fresh run. "Good stuff," he muttered to himself. That's when he heard the first noise. A heavy step somewhere up the hill behind him. Now deer moved through those woods all the time, and sometimes a black bear would wander down from the ridge. Grandpa wasn't the nervous type. He took another sip of moonshine and kept tending the still. Then the step came again. Not light like a deer, not clumsy like a bear. This sounded slow, deliberate, like something big walking on 2 feet. Grandpa turned around and stared up into the trees. At first he didn't see a thing. Then the branches started shaking. Something was coming down the hill. Grandpa said it stepped into the moonlight and stood there between the trees, like it owned the place. It was taller than any man he'd ever seen, covered head to toe in dark matted hair. Its arms hung long and heavy like a gorilla's, and its shoulders were so wide they blocked half the path. But what he remembered most were the eyes. They weren't glowing like folks say in ghost stories. They just looked angry. The creature took a slow step closer to the still. Grandpa reached for his shotgun leaning against a stump, but the Sasquatch moved faster than he expected. With one swing of its arm, it knocked the gun clean out of his hands and sent it sliding into the creek. Grandpa stumbled backward and nearly tripped over the mash barrel. The creature let out a deep growl that sounded like a chainsaw starting up. Grandpa always said that was the moment he realized 2 things. First, He wasn't getting out of that holler without a fight. Second, the only weapon he had left was the moonshine. So he grabbed the nearest jar, popped the lid off, and held it out in front of him. "Now, hold on there, big fella," he said. The Sasquatch tilted its head like it was curious. Grandpa said it leaned forward and sniffed the jar. Then, before the creature could change its mind, Grandpa shoved the jar right up against its mouth. The Sasquatch snarled and tried to swat him again, but some of that whiskey spilled onto its lips. And that's when something strange happened. The creature froze. It blinked a couple times. Then it grabbed the jar right out of Grandpa's hand and drank the whole thing like a thirsty man at a summer picnic. Grandpa backed away, slow. The Sasquatch stared at the empty jar, then at the still, then at Grandpa. For a moment it looked almost thoughtful. Then it let out a loud howl that echoed all the way up the holler, but the howl didn't sound angry anymore. It sounded confused. The creature staggered sideways and bumped into a tree. Grandpa realized his moonshine was hitting the beast the same way it hit city folks, hard and fast. The Sasquatch tried to stand up straight, but its legs wobbled like a newborn calf. Grandpa didn't wait around for the second round. He grabbed his mule and ran up the hollow path as fast as his old legs could carry him. Behind him, he heard the creature stumbling through the trees, knocking branches and laughing in a strange rumbling way. When Grandpa finally reached the top of the ridge, he turned around and looked back down into the hollow. The fire under the still was still glowing through the trees, but the Sasquatch was nowhere to be seen. Grandpa never went back to that spot again. He built a new still a few miles away and kept his operations a little closer to town. But every once in a while, after a couple jars of moonshine, he'd lean back in his chair and say the same thing. "Whatever lives in them hollers," he'd tell us, "it ain't afraid of men, but it sure don't handle Tennessee whiskey very well." And sometimes late at night, if the wind was blowing just right through the woods behind the house, Grandpa swore he could hear something down in the valley, something big, something stumbling, and every once in a while, something laughing. Stories like this are just the beginning. I post longer stories and book chapters on my Substack and Ream if you'd like to read more. The links are in the description. After stories like that started spreading around Readyville, some folks began wondering if the creature ever left the hollers. People around Readyville like to pretend the woods keep their secrets tucked away in the hills. The hollers feel a long way from the noise of Nashville, but if you follow the creek beds and ridges long enough, every trail eventually leads toward the city. At least that's what old-timers say. After Grandpa Melton's moonshine story started circulating, a few hunters claimed they'd seen strange tracks along the ridges south of town. Big ones, too big for any bear that lived in those hills. Most folks figured it was just another tall tale, until a truck driver named Cal Dixon swore he saw something crossing the highway late one winter night. Cal was hauling freight toward Nashville around 2 in the morning when his headlights caught movement near the tree line. He slowed the truck and leaned forward over the wheel. At first he thought it was a man standing in the road, but the thing stepped forward, and Cal said his stomach dropped. It was huge, covered in dark hair that hung down its arms like wet moss. The creature didn't run when the truck lights hit it. It just looked at Cal for a long moment, eyes reflecting the headlights like dull coins. Then, it walked across the highway and disappeared into the trees on the other side. Cal reported it to a buddy the next day, laughing about it like he'd imagined the whole thing. But the strange part came a few weeks later. That same buddy was leaving a bar in Printer's Alley when he noticed police lights flashing near the end of the alley. Someone had called in a strange report. A woman had seen a huge shadow moving between the dumpsters behind one of the bars. The police didn't find anything when they searched, just a few knocked-over trash cans, and a line of massive footprints leading down the alley, heading toward the Cumberland River. Some folks around Readyville think the creature from the hollers still roams the ridges at night. Others think it sometimes wanders farther, from the quiet woods of Tennessee all the way into the neon shadows of Nashville. And if that's true, the scariest part might be this: the city crowds probably don't even notice it walking among them. Stories like this are just the beginning. I post longer stories and book chapters on my Substack and Ream if you'd like to read more. The links are in the description.